Hi, this is Ted. Today I'm going to be studying the book of Job, and I'm going to be using ChatGPT to help me study the book of Job. Actually, I did this already, so I'm going to walk you through what I did and help you see how ChatGPT helped me tremendously to find some interesting stuff about the book of Job, some of which I had no idea about before. And the prompt I put into ChatGPT was, tell me something about the book of Job that I don't know. All right, ChatGPT likes to pat you on the back about how brilliant you are. And so, of course, it pats me on my back since you already have such deep biblical knowledge. All right, let me offer something a bit off the beaten path about Job. Now, this is piquing my interest. Many scholars believe the book of Job contains some of the oldest Hebrew in the Bible. Now, I knew that. Possibly predating even much of Genesis. Didn't know that. If I want to find sources on that one, I can ask ChatGPT at this point. Tell me more about the sources. Where'd you get this? A linguistic analysis suggests that Job preserves archaic words and poetic structures not found elsewhere in Hebrew literature. I could ask about this if that's what piqued my interest. But I just want to go elsewhere. Some of its vocabulary appears only in Job, leading some to think it may have roots in non-Israelite tradition or dialect. That I knew. So I'm going to give this 50-50, a 5 out of 10, because I knew some of this, but I didn't know other parts. So about half this I knew, half I didn't. Another intriguing aspect is that Job's three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, seem to represent different philosophical traditions. Now this piques my interest. Through looking at one of my large language models, ChatGPT being only one of them, but through these LLMs, I was able to come across that already before, but haven't had the time to really pursue that. And that's what's going to be getting my interest today. Eliphaz speaks with mystical authority, relying on personal experience and revelation. Bildad is more of a traditionalist, leaning on the received wisdom. Zophar is the harshest, embodying a rigid, almost legalistic theology. Their different approaches mirror later debates in Jewish and Greco-Roman philosophy about suffering and justice. Now, this is fascinating. I think if I were to modernize this, what I would probably do is put different schools of thought from the modern points of view. Tell me more about the three philosophical traditions. This is what piqued my interest, so that's what I wanted to get further into. The speeches of Job's three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, reflect distinct philosophical and theological traditions, each offering a different explanation for Job's suffering. Now, up until ChatGPT and AI, other chatbots, I've never really realized that the three were so, in distinct different groups, different philosophies, looking at the same issue of suffering. Their perspectives align with broader ancient wisdom traditions, and their arguments are echoed in later Jewish, Greek, and even modern thought. Eliphaz, the mystical philosopher, experience and revelation. He's the first to speak. He represents wisdom, the wisdom tradition that emphasizes personal experience, divine revelation, and mystical aspects of suffering. In Job 4:12-21, he recounts a night vision in which a spirit revealed a truth to him, suggesting that knowledge of God's justice is sometimes revealed in supernatural ways. This is fascinating. This is awesome. All right, philosophical connection. His approach is similar to Neoplatonism and even mystical traditions that believe in direct divine illumination. Like later Gnostics, he suggests that wisdom comes from a higher hidden source rather than logical reasoning alone. Theological theme, he assumes that Job must have sinned, but he presents this gently, arguing that humans are inherently flawed and the divine discipline is part of God's mysterious plan. I find this absolutely, I give it a 9 out of 10. Bildad, the traditionalist, appealed to authority and tradition. Bildad makes a much more conservative, traditional wisdom approach. He relies on ancestral knowledge, arguing that Job should listen to the teachings of the past. In Job 8 through 10, he says, "Ask the former generations and find out what their ancestors learned. For we were born only yesterday and know nothing." I find this absolutely fantastic, awesome, because so many cultures really rely so heavily on ancient wisdom and traditions. The theological theme, Bildad insists that God is just and that suffering must be due because of Job's wrongdoing. His worldview is rigid. If Job is suffering, it must mean Job has done something wrong. There is no room for unexplained suffering in his theology. You know, I find that even now there are people who believe wholeheartedly that if you're suffering, it's because you did something wrong. The whole prosperity gospel really borderlines on this kind of stuff. If you're very godly and righteous, you're going to be blessed. And if you are not being blessed, it's because you've done something wrong. You haven't had enough faith. It's that kind of thinking. Now, let's get into a comparison and contrast. Zophar, the harsh traditionalist. Legalism and harsh rationalism. All right, Zophar is the most aggressive of the three. He represents a more legalistic and rigid worldview, where suffering is seen as direct punishment from God. He argues that Job is suffering less than he deserves, Job 11:6, and suggests that Job should simply repent and restore his fortunes. Well, in order to restore his fortunes, he should repent. The philosophical connection. In Zophar, reasoning aligns with Stoicism and deterministic worldviews that see suffering as an inevitable consequence of actions. His thinking also has shades of Calvinistic determinism. Calvinistic determinism. The idea that divine justice is absolute and humans have no right to question it. Theological theme. He offers no comfort, only the stark assertion that Job must be guilty and should submit to God's will without question. Do you know people like that? I've run into them. And it's I find it a little bit sad. Comparison and contrast. These three perspectives, mystical experience, Eliphaz, traditional wisdom, Bildad, and harsh legalism, Zophar, reflect common human responses to suffering. Seeking supernatural insight, relying on past wisdom and tradition, enforcing rigid logical justice. Interestingly, Job rejects all three, showing that conventional wisdom alone cannot explain human suffering. This sets up the climax of the book where God speaks to him from the whirlwind, emphasizing his sovereignty and emphasizing that it is beyond human understanding. All right. Now this I found very, very fascinating and very interesting. I'd like to get into it deeper. How about the fourth young friend who speaks last? Does he represent a school of thought, I say? These are my words. Yes, ChatGPT tells me. Job's fourth and youngest friend, Elihu, offers a distinct perspective from the three older friends. And scholars often associate him with different school of thought. While Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar argue from experience, tradition, and strict justice, Elihu takes a more nuanced approach, one that aligns with a developing theology of suffering as a means of divine instruction and refinement. The prophet philosopher, suffering as discipline and divine pedagogy. All right, Elihu appears in Job 32 through 37. After the other three friends have spoken and Job has rejected them. Basically, he's rejecting all of human knowledge and what it can give him, all the best of wisdom, the traditions of what the fathers have given to us, everything. Every school of thought, out the door when it comes to suffering. He is younger, talking about Elihu, he's younger and angrier, feeling that both Job and his friends have failed to speak correctly about God. Unlike the others, he doesn't accuse Job of outright sin, but he suggests that suffering serves as a tool for divine instruction and purification rather than just punishment. All right, his philosophical and theological connections. Wisdom as divine discipline. Suffering as education. Elihu's arguments align with Proverbs and later Jewish wisdom literature, particularly Sirach and the Wisdom of Solomon, which are not in the Bible, but we know about them because they have survived, these two books see suffering as a form of discipline rather than simple retribution. His idea that suffering teaches and refines people connects with Stoicism, which sees hardship as a means of character development. I think James might fall into this category as well. Trying of your faith work as patience, and patience experience, and experience hope. A more transcendent view of God. Elihu's God is less transactional than the one described by Job's other friends. He emphasizes God's transcendence, much like Platonism, suggesting that humans cannot fully understand God's ways, but should submit to his higher wisdom. This foreshadows God's own speech from the whirlwind in Job 38 through 41, where divine wisdom surpasses human comprehension. The role of the mediator, finally, in his way of thinking, in Job 33, 23 through 24, Elihu introduces a new idea, a mediator between God and man who can intercede and bring restoration. This hints at later messianic theology in Jewish and Christian thought, where suffering is not just punishment but a process that requires divine mediation for redemption. How he differs from his friends. Eliphaz relies on mystical experience, Bildad on tradition and ancestral wisdom. Zophar enforces strict legalism, retributive justice. Elihu reframes suffering as educational process, a way for God to communicate with humanity. The final significance of Elihu is this. He is a transitional figure between Job's friends and God's direct speech. His idea of suffering as refinement anticipates later Jewish and Christian theology, where suffering is often seen as a test or preparation for something greater. Unlike the other friends, God does not rebuke Elihu at the end of the book, suggesting that his view might be closer to the truth. Does Elihu represent a school of thought? Yes. His perspective reflects proto-wisdom theology that later appears in Hellenistic Jewish thought, Philo of Alexandria, for example, Christian theology where suffering is redemptive, and Islamic Sufi thought which views suffering as means of spiritual purification. And I would put the book of James in there as well. And Hebrews as well, the 12th chapter of Hebrews. Could be the 13th chapter, it's one of those two. Would you like to explore the connections between Elihu and later traditions? I did not pursue that. I ended it there, and that's going to be the end of my Bible study. Before I go, like and subscribe, comment. And this is Ted.